what you're doing isn't working. It's where you haven't gone that you need to go. And so all of that is going into the past, into the chaos of the past, you could even say, and pulling up the spirit that inhabits that from the bottom and uniting with it. And imagine that you're afraid and you don't want to go there. But if you want to put yourself together, then that's exactly where you have to go. And so it's frequently the case that what you want to find is to be found where you least want to find it. One of the times in your life when you actually realize that you're an individual is when you'll go and ask your parents something and you'll realize they actually don't know any more about what you should do than you do. And that sucks. And that's partly why people are often willing to maintain a tyrant-slave relationship with their father. It's like, on the one hand, you have to be inferior in a relationship like that. You know, you've always got the judge watching you. But on the other hand, there's always someone who knows what to do. There's always someone standing between you and the unknown that you can go ask, what should I do? Well, at some point, you'll realize that the reason you can't ask that anymore is because they actually don't know any more than you do. And then that's a pain, like that is a symbolic death. And that's also when you establish a more individual relationship with your parents. It's at that point that you could conceivably start taking care of them instead of the reverse. And that's a time that should come. But you have to let that image of perfection go. And that exposes you. And so, you know, that's also the case that once you hit a certain point in your development, the answers that you're looking for are not going to be found in your parents' house. It's as simple as that. Now, you could artificially maintain your dependency, but, you know, if you do that for too long, things get pretty ugly. So you get pretty stale and you know, you're like bread that's been on the shelf for too long. When you orient your vision, different things appear to you in the world. So, and I mean this literally. So, because you can't see everything, your vision calculates what's necessary, your brain calculates what's necessary for you to see so that you get to the point that you're aiming at. And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean it literally. Things that aren't relevant to what you're seeking, you won't see them unless they get in your way. And they have to really block your pathway before they'll be literally visible. So you orient yourself towards something, and that makes some things visible that wouldn't be visible and makes other things invisible that you might have seen. And so when you change your orientation, what manifests itself in the world also changes. Now, I had a structure that was orienting me properly in relationship to the world. And as far as it was embodied in my actual father, it's now gone. Is there any possibility that I can find that again? And that is what you want. You see, like if you're in a chaotic circumstance, maybe you've escaped, let's say, from a bad relationship or something like that, and you're out of it, but now you don't know what to do. What you're hoping is that you can get your life back together, right? That you can put the pieces that have fallen apart back together. And so you're automatically going to generate a fantasy about producing another, let's call it stable state. You're going to be looking for the spirit that would enable that stable state to be generated. Because really what it is, in some sense, is your new personality. You're in chaos, you have to become something new in order to get out of chaos. And so you're hoping for that, you're hoping that you'll see it. And so that's going to make certain things visible to you. That's the proper way of thinking about it. You know, when you get curious about something, and maybe you're curious about something and you walk into a bookstore, that curiosity is going to guide you to a certain set of books. The fact that you have the question in mind is going to open your eyes to certain kinds of possibilities. And so if your goal is to reestablish your union with the positive father, let's say, then certain things are going to appear and other things aren't. And that's really what this represents. The transcendent star is the goal. It's capable of, let's say, delivering a message to you. In some sense, that's what's happening when you're thinking, you know, because you have a problem you want to solve, you have somewhere you want to go with your thoughts, and as a consequence of that, information reveals itself to you in the interior landscape. It's a very strange thing. You know, in some sense it feels as if you're producing the thoughts, but it could equally be said that you're watching the thoughts reveal themselves. And which of those is the more accurate description is by no means obvious. You can certainly have thoughts that surprise you, which is very strange. It's like They're your thoughts. How in the world can they surprise you? But they do. So it's like you didn't know them before you thought them up. And then the question is, well, where did they come from if you didn't know them before you thought them up? They sort of spring out of the void. That's one way of thinking about it. Anyways, the idea is that if you fall into a chaotic state and everything falls apart, there's the possibility that things can come back together, including what you've just learned. It's like there's something down there that's capable of reforming and reemerging that incorporates the previous state, but that takes it farther. And you're not going to find that unless you descend into this chaotic place where it feels like all order is gone. While you generate order, it's going to be akin to the order that you had before, but there's going to be something new about it as well. So it's down to the bottom of the chaotic state to bring up what you're missing. And so all of that is going into the past, into the chaos of the past, you could even say, and pulling up the spirit that inhabits that from the bottom and uniting with it. And if you don't do that, well, you're defenseless in the face of the tragedy of life. And then that's not so good, because if you're defenseless in the face of the tragedy of life, then you get way more hurt than you would otherwise get, and so do the people around you. And then the probability that you're going to be resentful and bitter about that is really high, because no one likes to fail continually. And then you get bitter and resentful. And then once you're bitter and resentful, well, being vengeful and mean is the next step. It doesn't take much of a transformation to move you from that place to the next. So Jung had this phrase that he liked, that he took from the alchemists, which was inster qualinus invenitur. And what it meant was, what you most want to find will be found where you least want to look. There's this old story that's from King Arthur, and King Arthur has these knights, right? They all sit around a round table, which means they're roughly equal. That's what the round table means. And they're off to find the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail is the most valuable object. That's what it means. So they're off to find the most valuable thing, but they don't know what it is, and they don't know where it is. But they know that there's a most valuable thing. So in some sense, it's akin to them orienting themselves by the star. And they don't know where to look. And so what they decide is, they have the castle, and it's the middle of a forest. And so each knight decides to start looking for the Holy Grail by entering the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And so what's the idea there? Well, imagine there are things that come easy to you and that you're fond of pursuing and that you're happy about pursuing. So you've found those and pursued them and you've mastered them. So you know all that, but then there's another place that you don't want to go. And so you haven't gone there and you haven't mastered it, and you're very small in comparison to it because you haven't mastered it. And so it has this monstrous aspect. But if what you're doing isn't working, it's where you haven't gone that you need to go. And so I can give you another example of this. So let's say you're an agreeable person. And so you don't like conflict and you won't stand up for yourself, and you regard anger and the proclivity to provoke and to engage in conflict as something that's positively terrible. It's not only that you're not good at it, it's actually that it's wrong. So that's where you have to go if you're going to learn how to stand up for yourself. And imagine that you're afraid. Maybe you have something like agoraphobia. And so there's a whole bunch of things that you're afraid of, and you don't want to go there. But if you want to put yourself together, then that's exactly where you have to go. And so it's frequently the case that what you want to find is to be found where you least want to find it. And that idea is echoed in the prominent stories of dragons and gold. It's exactly the same idea, is that the dragon is this terrible thing. It's this terrible predatory thing that lives forever and is very, very wise. And it lives underground, and it'll kill you. It'll burn you up in a second. But it hoards gold. And so you have to go there into the dragon's lair if you're going to get the gold. And that's a representation of people's paradoxical relationship with reality. It's like you have to go out there and confront it in order to incorporate what it has to offer to you. But the probability that that's going to be intensely dangerous and push you right to the limit, first of all, those are actually the same thing. If it didn't push you to the limit, you wouldn't gain anything valuable from it. So you don't get one without the other. You don't get the gold without the dragon. That's a very strange, very, very strange idea. But it seems to be accurate that if you don't follow the pathway that you're supposed to follow, that the seas will become stormy for you, and something will come up and pull you down, and you'll be in a terrible place for some length of time till you learn your lesson. And if you're lucky, you'll get spit back up on shore, and then you can go do what you should do. Well, I guess partly what this means is that if you're not oriented properly in the world, you should take your doubts and the chaos that you're enveloped in seriously. You should face it and think it through. You should go into it as far as you can go into it, because maybe you'll find something at the bottom of it. I mean, the alternative is to pretend that it doesn't exist. You might think, well, why would it be the world outside of what's known and the unconscious at the same time? This weird intermingling of those two things. And as far as I can tell, that's because when you're in chaos and you don't know what's going on, then you start imagining what might be going on. And that imagination is partly the world, as it might be, but it's also partly the structure of your unconscious mind, which is producing the fantasies. And so when you're truly in chaos, then the distinction between your fantasies and reality isn't clear. That's actually part of what constitutes the chaos. So imagine this. So you're in a relationship and the person betrays you. And you knew who they were, or at least you thought you did, before that moment. But now you're looking at them and you don't know who they are. And you don't know what the past was. And you don't know what the present is. And you don't know what the future is going to be. All of that's been thrown up into the air in a major way. That's traumatic. So much has fallen apart that it's traumatic. So what do you start to do? You start to imagine what might be the situation. Well, then the reality is your imagination and the reality at the same time. They're not pulled apart at all. You cannot distinguish between them. You might ask yourself, well, why bother confronting chaos? If chaos is the ultimate reality, then what the hell use is there in facing it? Because it's just going to reveal itself as the ultimate reality and drown you. But the myths always say the same thing. They say, no, if you confront what's really disturbing you, if you really confront it, you do it voluntarily, you're going to find order in it eventually. Or at least that's the only way you're going to find order. Now, it's not like these stories are optimistic, and it's not as if they give you a sure guide to success. That's the other thing. It's not like they're unerringly accurate, because you can be subsumed by chaos that's so total that even if you face it, you're not going to prevail. I mean, that's why people die. That's one way of looking at it anyways. But the mythology basically says this is your best bet. If there's a process that's going to work, this is it. And then you might think, well, the better you do it, the better the chances are of success, or the more consistently you do it, the better the chances of success are. And I think that that's a perfectly reasonable way of looking at it.